Hi, I'm reading from my book, Disinformed. We're into Chapter 1, Section 3, and this is not an audio book, by the way, that my house has noises, and that's just going to be the way it is. And so I'm just reading. I'm reading and commenting, and I hope it's interesting. I hope it's useful for you. This is a difficult section about what is truth and is it even real? Is it just some arbitrary concept we've come up with? Is it just human language? Is it outside of us? Is it inside of us? Where is truth? What is truth? And I begin by saying I must here be a good scholar and an honest thinker and tell you that to define truth is basically an impossible task. And I had an interesting question from a student a couple weeks ago. It was something like, what's the difference between ethics and morality? And I just had to say something like, I don't really distinguish between those two because language is slippery. Depending on the context, you might see one person using ethics and morality interchangeably. You might find a philosopher who really distinguishes between those two terms. Language has this slippery kind of quality to it. It's almost an impossible task. It depends on the discourse of the community. It means different things to different people at different times. Some have suggested that truth is just or merely socially constructed, that truth is whatever two or more people happen to agree that it is. But I don't find that satisfactory because all you have to do is imagine being at a flat earth convention and there's something wrong there. We know that there's something not quite right about that worldview. So we have a kind of working folk truth. We have a kind of working contesting between our experience of reality, our knowledge of reality, our first-hand subjective experience, and then claims about the objective world. To me, that's one of the unreconciled and maybe irreconcilable problems of philosophy is from the subjective point of view of consciousness, you have an internal experience of reality, but then we also share an objective reality, and we're trying to agree on what that objective reality is with all of our subjective differences accounted for. Very difficult to find anything that's universal across humans. Take any two humans, they have many similarities, many differences, but the lines are not clear. It doesn't make for great definitions. There are, of course, like universal emotions, universal songs, universal genres of music across cultures. So there's great universality in myths, the work of Joseph Campbell. But they're difficult lines to draw. They're difficult discoveries to make. There are many different forms of truth. When we look at a peer-reviewed scientific study in a reputable journal like Nature, we have an understanding or maybe a hope that a rigorous methodology has been applied and the findings might be replicable. That gets us close to a kind of scientific truth, about as close as you can get. But then again, science is always changing and rewriting itself, and you can't always find a peer-reviewed journal article to help guide you through the decision-making of everyday life. You would grind your life to a halt if every moment you said, wait, hold on, I need to go find a peer-reviewed journal article and check the science about that. You'd be paralyzed. You wouldn't be able to do anything. So we operate in these kind of simpler ways of being without always vigorously investigating and interrogating what we're doing and the claims that we find around us. We would run out of time. We don't have enough time in life as mortal creatures to rigorously subject every moment, every claim, every decision to peer-reviewed science. At least right now, we don't have that ability. The rigorous and hyper-specific findings of a peer-reviewed scientific article might get you a step closer to solving a serious problem, But we don't have all the time or discipline-specific knowledge to evaluate these kinds of studies or to apply them to our lives every day. Another conundrum. Some great philosophers suggested there is no such thing as truth at all. But at the same time, we can't throw away the concept entirely. We need to hold our representatives and news organizations to certain standards. When we see an advertisement, we expect it not to mislead nor to misrepresent. When we have a conversation with a friend or colleague, we expect to be able to trust what they're saying. The problem is, maybe we shouldn't. We'll see how Plato, thousands of years ago, in his famous dialogue Phaedrus, warned of those who would falsely persuade. The ultimate lesson of that dialogue, Phaedrus by Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, is his urging that one should first become a philosopher, and only then should one be a rhetorician, a speaker. Socrates, speaking in this famous Platonic dialogue, asks the titular Phaedrus, that is, the young man Phaedrus, who was a friend of Socrates. Socrates asks Phaedrus, "He then, who being ignorant of the truth aims at appearances, will only attain an art of rhetoric which is ridiculous, and is not an art at all." This is the old maxim to think before you speak, but on a much higher level, an all-encompassing level. Not just in one instance, but as a person. First grow your knowledge, first become a philosopher, first learn your subject deeply, turn it around, turn it upside down, poke holes in it. Go as far as you can into your topic, and then you might speak and write about it with some confidence, with some knowledge. Perhaps, even then. It turns out that the more you learn about any particular subject, the more you realize you know absolutely nothing about it, and it uncovers more mysteries. More knowledge leads to more mysteries, leads to more knowledge and higher mysteries and greater mysteries. Plato is asking us to engage in the hard work of philosophy, the very difficult task of looking beyond the superficial veneer of the world around us. And then, of course, there's the most haunting lesson of all. Most people are not philosophers. Most people are not experts in their fields either. We should not trust most people. It's a sad and scary thing. We should not trust most people. Different kinds of trust, though, develop. I mean, the trust between family members, the trust between community members. There are different kinds of trust. I mean trust in like evaluating the claims that they're making, is the information that they have. You might love and trust a family member to take care of you and to cook delicious food, but you wouldn't trust them in the same way to be an expert on climate change or careers or any hyper-specific topic in which they don't have expertise. So we mistakenly conflate the trust of love and of interpersonal relationships with the trust of information. Most people are not experts in their fields. We should not trust most people in their claims automatically, the claims that they're making. We don't know where they got their data from, if they looked at any data at all. How likely is it that they are an expert in their field and they evaluated all of the best science and the best data and the best reasoning on the subject on which someone is speaking? The likelihood is that they have not. People have agendas and interests that cloud their judgment and are aimed at persuading you with false or incomplete arguments. And many have left their lives and their world completely unexamined. How can you trust someone who has not examined their life, who has not admitted to their lack of knowledge, who has such conviction that they haven't considered the opposing arguments? The world is not black and white, so do not be tricked by those who claim to know the truth before they have considered their subject profoundly. In Plato's words, as a philosopher, first think, then speak. What I can say is you should question everything. That's how we're going to get closer to understanding what might be true and what might not be. For the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, questioning builds a way. That's a direct quote from his essay on the question concerning technology. Questioning builds a way. It's a method of living. It's a method of discovery. It's a method of being. That's the legacy of Socrates. We must have the humility to realize how little we all know. Not just ourselves, but all of us, all of those around us. Wearing a suit and appearing on a YouTube video does not make a person credible. Just because an article was published on a website does not mean it was fact-checked. It's up to us, every one of us, to assess the credibility of the information we seek out each day. Other people are out to persuade us to buy, vote, think, believe, and change your way of viewing the world. They don't want you to think and ask questions for yourself. There's no monetary reward in that. You can't monetize philosophizing. If you could, they would have done it by now. Maybe they will. It's a scary thought. Philosophy might be dying already. Well, that's another thing. We might not know the truth of everything. That's a catastrophization. Well, we won't. I don't think philosophy is dying. We might be more philosophizing now than ever. It's interesting to see how, books about the Stoics and ancient Romans have become popular. That gives me a lot of hope that we're looking back again to the past, seriously and widely looking back at the past, and we need more, much, much more of that. We might not know the truth of everything ourselves, but neither do big corporations or political candidates or religious groups or ideological groups. They don't know any more than you do. Don't trust anyone who claims they have all the answers. None of us do. I don't either. Don't trust everything I say. I'm sure there are holes in my knowledge. There are gaps in my way of seeing the world. I'm merely sharing a kind of method of questioning with you that I think is useful and I have found useful in my life. And then I have a chart in here of 7 different forms of truth, different types of truths that appear in our world. Scientific truth, and then I define it and I critique it. What are the shortcomings of it? So scientific truth, some of us think of this as like the highest, truest, most objective kind of truth. And yes, that is, in a way, what we can replicate, what can be replicated by other people. At least that's a kind of truth of consistency. It's a kind of prophetic truth in a way, to have a formula, say, in physics that we can use to predict the motion of an object in space and time. It gives a kind of power, a prophetic power. It's almost what truth means, is you say something and it becomes true through time. That's a more difficult idea, but there are shortcomings to scientific truth. Like we've mentioned already, it's not like you can look up a peer-reviewed scientific journal article about what you should make for dinner tonight, or how should you learn how to, I don't know, play a new instrument, or which instrument should you choose. Or you might find a study that says, individuals who play music for so many minutes a day or have such and such an impact on their education if you're in a certain age range and demographic, and you have to work out all the conflicting variables. Yeah, we sometimes discover things that are replicable, and that's interesting and exciting, but you so often find cases where it can't be applied universally. So there are shortcomings to this very specific type of truth, highly specific. I mean, that's what science is. In these very controlled environments, can we replicate results? These are not, scientific knowledge does not always help us with social problems of how do we solve a housing crisis, or what should you do with your life. And so scientific truth does not give us everything we need as humans. So going on through the chart, I talk about religious truths, which many people, they claim that they feel or experience a connection to something divine or metaphysical, God or gods. Sometimes people claim that these truths are carried through special or magic books. But it's impossible to verify these types of claims. There's no evidence for most religious claims, and there are nearly endless competing religious ideas. Religious experiences are subjective. There's something that happens inside of us, in our mind. And this is that divide. It's that divide between the subjective, the internal experience of being human, with the objective. And I believe this is a kind of mistake that humans make, to conflate the subjective with the objective. You might feel a great reverence for the universe. I do, the cosmos. It doesn't mean that everyone does or feels it the same way, or that they think the same exact story as yours. There's great diversity in religious stories. They can't all be true, right? More on that later. I have a book that I'm working on. It's called something like Metaphysics for Materialists, because I actually find myself to be a rather poetic, spiritual-ish, metaphysical person, and yet I'm very objective about the way that I think about the world. And I know that there are no magic books from a higher realm or another universe. And so it leaves me in this unusual place where I'm like, well, the gods come from us, and they are us. But then you start getting into this strange feeling of like a blasphemous argument, where you don't want to have so much hubris that you say, I am God. It's a delusion. And yet we are the universe. Carl Sagan said we are the universe observing itself. So I'm working on some notes for metaphysics for materialists. Let me know if that sounds interesting in the future. The next of the 7 types of truths I write about personal truths. Truth is whatever I observe it to be. It's my life. It's my truth. And so I have the right to speak my truth. That's valid. That's a type of truth. You subjectively experience one particular way of viewing the world. You can't really invalidate someone's subjective experience. But again, this is a type of truth that it's really impossible to provide evidence for at this time. Maybe sometime in the future with brain mapping or something. Our memories can be inaccurate, and most people have deeply held biases and problems which distort their perception of the world. So we know that the individual observer is not a particularly good source of truth much of the time. Next in the list, I have the idea of postmodern truth, which is the idea of social construction of truth. Truth is not something discovered, but something invented by humans. That's quite possible. Language springs from humans. Truth is a concept within language. But again, the problem here, groups of people can share inaccurate or false ideas. And so it doesn't quite capture the whole meaning of truth as being a replicable, salient, irrefutable, factually true information. That seems to be what, if we have a baseline definition of truth, even an acategorical, non-categorical definition of truth, it seems to me something like that, something that can be discovered independently by multiple people time and time again. And that encompasses types of subjective metaphysical truths as well. There may not be gods dancing in the clouds, but we may all like the stories about the gods dancing in the clouds, and they may help us in our lives. And so that has some kind of connective tissue truth to what it means to be human. And to me, that's very, very easily reconcilable with the materialist conception of how the brain creates consciousness in the body. I don't find any conflict there. Then I go to absolute truth. Truth is based on universal properties that can somehow be discovered in the universe. We talked a little bit about this, like with the equation from physics. Or what about transitive property of equality? If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C as well. And you can't refute that. That seems to be just a kind of universal, infinite, axiomatic, self-evident truth, a kind of absolute truth, a logical truth, right from the universe itself. But is it? That's a difficult. I mean, whole books could be written in that direction. So the critique of that then would be like, well, that's a very anthropocentric, a very human-centered way of thinking about truth, because again, those concepts spring from the human, born of the human. And there are varying and irreconcilable accounts of the universe, and these are not always replicable. Plato's theory of ideal forms. Then I talk about folk truth, which is just localized learning, right? Not just, but very important. The kinds of truths that develop in a community or a region, knowledge about an area, even like craft knowledge, technical knowledge. That was Aristotle's very important techne in his Nicomachean Ethics, the book he wrote for his son, apparently, Nicomachus. Talks about techne as a way of knowing the world, the craft knowledge, the skill knowledge that you have, this sort of roots of technology. Your schooling, your community, the things that people have said to you, the music you've listened to throughout your life, that all becomes part of your brain mapping, your neurology, and that becomes true to you, and you share wisdom and remedies and songs and ideas with people around you and in your schools and communities, and you grow a kind of grassroots shared understanding of the world that is valid in a community. But that type of folk logic can lead to serious problems like outsiders are bad, or burn all the witches, right? You can have superstitions that are unverified by external groups or outside communities. Finally, what I'm getting at here is this final concept that I find really useful is rhetorical truth, which is a kind of sliding scale of truth. It's like, how true is a thing based on the best available evidence that we can find? What seems to be true can change based on the best available information. And indeed, we should change. We should not hold anything so dear that really compelling evidence and vetted evidence and replicable evidence and solid evidence and lots of it, that should change our truth, I think, right? Wouldn't you want the best possible evidence informing your decision making? I think so. The most comprehensive. But how do you define what that is? And so you must always be searching. You must always be questioning. Truth claims, in a rhetorical truth claims are evaluated by the credibility of the source and examined for the validity of their argument. So it's a kind of objectively as much as possible. It's very difficult. But then we still have flaws, because that's an potentially endlessly recursive process by which you're always seeking and seeking and seeking and never quite get anywhere. Infinitely seeking, infinitely asking questions, finally to nothing? Finally to know nothing? I don't know. Well, the next section, I have the epigraph from Bitzer. Bitzer is the bane of every grad student who studies English and rhetoric and stuff, but I love, he writes, rhetoric is a mode of altering reality, not by the application of physical force on an object, like I'm changing the world right now. Every time I move the book, I've changed the world, but by the use of language, by discourse, by the power that we create, the meanings we create. We literally change the world. We cause action. We incite action in others. It's a powerful idea. We'll get more on that later. I just wanted to finish. That was the end of chapter 1 of my book, Disinformed. And there's that nice, I have this nice little table in there with the different types of truths, which I think is a useful categorization. That's kind of Aristotelian of me, I would say. Aristotle had this tendency toward putting things in groups of 3 and categorizing things. And thank goodness he did, because all our sciences stem from Aristotle. Ask a physicist who was the first physicist, and they'll probably say Aristotle. Some of those treatises were by his students, or by, you'll see attributions to like pseudo-Aristotle, or students of, or those writing in the Aristotelian tradition. And that's the end of chapter 1 of my book, Disinformed, and the chapter is called What is Truth? And I hope you enjoyed that. And again, I am humbly your servant, Professor Lawrence. I have a free book right now. You can sign up for my newsletter at danlawrenceauthor.com. And I really don't like hawking my stuff, so I deeply apologize for doing that. But it's a free book, and I hope it's valuable for you. I hope it helps you in dark times. That's the idea for the new book, How to Be Human. The idea there is a lot of people are feeling extra pain and suffering right now with the instability of the world. I mean, plague and war, and it's always like this, though, is the thing. Some of us are more insulated from it than others, but this is normal to be a human, to be ghostly, to be on the way out all the time, to be dancing, suffering, crawling sometimes through reality, through a temporary place. And so I wanted to write a really honest book just about the wildness of what that means to be a temporary blob of meat on a rock that's flying through space. And I go back to Plato. I play with these ideas of madness. Plato thought that madness was a gift from the gods. And Chomsky, the linguist, thinks that creativity and generativity is the central component of human nature. And so I'm playing with those ideas a little bit and kind of saying, hey, it's okay. It's okay if you're a little crazy. We all are. We're all struggling. We're all suffering. We're all mortal creatures bound for our doom. I don't get that dark with it, but in places you have to shed light on the inevitable nothingness that awaits us all if you want to really own up to what it means to be a human. That's the case there, but it's probably a little more amusing and a little more fun to read than I make it sound. But that's the free ebook you can get if you sign up for my newsletter. And the newsletter is nice, I think. I write little snippets about the ancient Greeks and sometimes short stories and bits about writing. And I'm a professor of writing, so I write about writing and I write things about other writers, and it's kind of just a little fireside newsletter thing. I hope you like it. Well, I'll leave it there. Good luck. Take care of yourselves. Drink water. Pass slowly and peacefully through the universe if you can, and help others. Help others with their movement through the universe. Try to guide and try to, as much as you can, I think, eliminate or abate the suffering of others. Try to comfort others if you can. I think those are pretty universally good things. Helping others and comforting others and assisting others. Good luck out there. Good luck. I hope I've maybe assisted you in some way, or maybe given you something to think about.